Amen.
Thanks, Joe. Morning, everybody. Say hello to the person next to you. I don't think you've done that yet today, so it's good to say hello to them. Smile. Sure they're welcome. Wonderful. We are continuing our journey through the book of 1 Samuel. We've made it up to 1 Samuel chapters 9 and 10. So we've entitled this talk, Kings, Prophets and Donkeys. And there's the funniest picture I could find on the topic on the internet. I'm going to... One for the chess fans. Going to start with 1 Samuel 9. I'm going to pick out a few key passages. So if you have got your Bible or device with you and want to follow, then I'll be picking out different bits of it. So good luck with that. I'm going to start with verse 2 as we consider this the choice between kings. So 1 Samuel 9, verse 2. Kish had a son named Saul, a handsome young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anybody else. Now the donkeys belonging to Saul's father Kish were lost, and Kish said to his son Saul, "Take one of the servants with you and go look for the donkeys." So he passed through the country of Ephraim, through the area around Shalisha, but they did not find them. Because there's a new king, and he's looking for the donkeys. A bit later on in the chapter. About this time tomorrow, God says to Samuel, "I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin, anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me." There's a new king, and he's looking for the donkeys, and he's going to save the people. A bit later, Samuel took a flask of olive oil, poured it on Saul's head, and kissed him, saying, "Has not the Lord anointed you ruler over his inheritance?" There's a new king, and he's being anointed, and he's looking for the donkeys, and he's going to rule over the people. And then in chapter 10, verse 10, when he and his servant arrived at Gibeah, a procession of prophets, which I've decided now is the collective noun for prophets, procession of, there's some good collective nouns, aren't there? Is it Parliament of Owls? That's quite good, yeah. Conspiracy of ravens, is it? I'm getting sidetracked, sorry. Where are we? Verse 10, oh yeah. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he joined them in their prophesying. And all those who formerly knew him saw him prophesying and said, "What's happened to this son of Kish? Is he also among the prophets?" Down to verse 20 of chapter 10. When Saul and all Israel came forward by tribes, the tribe of Benjamin was taken by lot. Then he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was taken. Finally, Saul, son of Kish, was taken. But when they looked for him, he wasn't to be found. So they inquired further, "Lord, has the man not come here yet?" And the Lord said, "Yes, he's hidden himself among the baggage." So they ran out and brought him out, and he stood among the people, and he was a head taller than all the others. And Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There's no one like him among all the people." And the people shouted, "Long live the king." But in verse 26, some scoundrel said, "How can this fellow save us?" They despised him and brought him no gifts. If I could have the PowerPoint up, please, Ruben, that would be great. Someone in your past will have said this phrase to you. I want you to think about when that phrase happened. And they would have looked to you and they would have said, "If Jimmy had jumped off a cliff, would you have done it too?" A few minutes now, just to remember where that moment was. Maybe share it with the person next to you. Off you go. Hopefully some good stories there. Maybe ones to chat about over drinks later. Because all of us, I feel, have a tendency to look at someone doing something stupid and then think, "Oh yeah, well, I could do that." That's why Jackass has to have that thing at the front, doesn't it? Like, "Do not try this at home." Because all of us have that tendency to look at someone doing something stupid and then copy them. I mean, it's not just stupid things. I used to have a phone. And my phone, you do phony things that phones do, like call. I don't need to tell you, they call you, you know what a phone does. And in order to get onto my phone, I had to type in 4 numbers. And never at any point did I consider that an inconvenience, because it took me less than a second, and they were the same 4 numbers each time, and I'd do it several times a day anyway. I quite like my phone until I saw someone else with a new phone. A phone you didn't have to type in numbers like a sucker. They just got their phone, they put their thumb on it, and it turned on. And there's me with my phone, a useless phone, typing in my 4 numbers like an idiot. I want a phone like that phone. This phone's rubbish. I want one like that. You just put your thumb on it. So I got one. It was great. Just get your phone up, put your thumb on it. You've seen this stuff. Turns on. And I saw someone else. They had a new phone. They didn't have to put their thumb on it like a sucker. There I am, getting my phone out, having to move this whole thumb 4 millimeters to the left of a phone I was already literally holding. No. They could just look at it. They looked at it and it turned on. I thought, this stupid phone, useless thing. Anyway, I'm putting my thumb on it like a sucker. I want one of them. Because there's something in all of us that every time we see someone, we just want to copy them. And whether it's a stupid thing or it's just something that we see, we just want to see what they've got, and we want it. The Israelites had a similar problem. Because the Israelites had a pretty cushy deal, what with talking to God and everything, but the Assyrians, now they had a king. And so in chapter 8, the Israelites come up to Samuel and say, we want a king. And Samuel says, what do you want a king for? And they say, well, they've got one. So we want one too. And at that point, I really want Samuel to turn around and say, if the Assyrians jumped off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff too? But Samuel doesn't say that. Samuel says, all right, you can have a king. And the Israelites, who just want a king because someone else has got one and they feel they should have one too, decide we're going to have a king too. And Samuel says, no, you don't understand. As soon as you get a king, they're going to charge you taxes. You read the list in chapter 8. They're going to charge you, they're going to take the best of you. You're going to have to pay tribute to them. You're basically going to be enslaved to that king. And they say, oh, it doesn't matter. We still want one because they've got one. So my first question to you this morning is, what are you elevating in your life that is making demands of you that you cannot keep? What are you elevating in your life that is making demands of you that you cannot keep? Because the Israelites are determined they're going to have a king, and it doesn't matter that in a few months' time they're going to be paying taxes, and in a few years' time they're going to be basically enslaved, because they want to elevate something that is going to make demands of them that they cannot keep. That payment plan looked so good in the shop, didn't it? For that TV that was slightly bigger than your wall. But you could pay it monthly. And we've elevated something, and now it's making demands of our bank balance that we quite frankly can't really keep anymore. Or that thing that, oh, if you could just come to this every week, we'd really like, and you know it's meant to be date night with the wife. But you say, yeah, I can do that. I'm gonna, and now it's making demands of your calendar that you can't keep. Or you quite like have a little flutter on the horses once a week, and it was once a week, and now it's every day, and now you're checking your phone now. This thing you've elevated is making demands of you that you can. What have you elevated in your life that is making demands of you that you cannot keep? Because the Israelites want a king, and they're going to have it no matter what. And they elevate King Saul, and they end up with this bad king because they've seen it, and they want it, and they've just got to have it. There's two ways to get rid of a bad king in your life. The first one is the easiest, and it's not to have him in the first place. So I'll give you one challenge, bit of advice today, is to live within your means. To not look at what they've got and decide you have to have it and you'll go to any. Live within your means. Find a way to look at. We don't know what would have happened if the Israelites had looked at the Assyrians and been like, it's good for you, but we're pretty happy with our setup here. We don't know what would happen. We don't have that privilege, but maybe don't write your life in the same way they wrote their story. Maybe write your life in one that lives with you. You don't keep stretching for things that are outside that's going to make demands of you that you cannot keep. I've got a wonderful little habit that I've taken up. I'm going to share it with you now. It's called online shopping, and what you do is you go and you click on all the things that you want. You ever tried this? You click on them, and they go into the little trolley. Not a real trolley, like a little icon of a trolley. And then you go to the trolley, and then you list all the things you want. And just as you're about to click buy, close it. It's so releasing. It's so satisfying. There's that moment where you're like, I actually didn't need that, actually. The world has continued. I tried another one which didn't go down quite as well, which was for anniversaries. I'd go to the shop and I'd take my wife with me to the card section. And I'd find one. This is the card I would have bought for you. And I'd put it back. I'm sharing them both with you. One of them worked much better for me than the other one, but if you can get them both, then you crack on. Can we choose not to elevate a bad king, but instead to live within your means? Because there's two ways to get rid of a bad king, and the first one's much better, which is not to have him in the first place. Do not elevate something in your life that is going to make demands of you later that you cannot keep. But the Israelites say, nah, we're having a king. And they do. There's this little passage in chapter 10, verse 10 that I'm going to read to you, reread, where something kind of strange happens. So Saul is on his way to being coronated, and in verse 10 of chapter 10, when he and the servant arrived at Gibeah, a procession of prophets met him, and Saul starts prophesying. Is Saul also among the prophets? Now, my understanding of what a prophet is someone who hears something God says, then shares it with the people. That's how my little brain understands it. Someone who hears something with what God says, shares it with the people. Normally, in church, we like to talk about how good it is to have these voices. I agree. But I think from this passage, this is not a good thing. I think that what this is a symbol of things going wrong. Because the country wanted a king because they didn't want to deal with God directly. They didn't want to deal with God directly, so they say, I'll tell you what, this whole following God, that's too tricky for us. Could we just delegate that job to someone else? Could we just have a king that looked a little bit like a god? If we could just have someone here that just make it their job to be the middle person between us. And I think it's interesting that the first thing Saul does on his way to be coronated is he takes that job of being the middleman between God and people. And I want to ask you another question, which is, who are you putting as the middleman between God and people? You hear it, don't you? Like, the worship band, they were a bit naff today, weren't they? Just picked all of those songs I don't like, and they were in the wrong key. Well, preacher, he went on a bit today, didn't he? And didn't really get my attention, so I didn't really get anything for that. I went to that church, and they had like a list of stuff I could get involved in, but to be honest, the font was a bit naff on the notice sheet, and I thought it wasn't for me. Now, obviously, as we've heard this morning, we've honoured them for, it's the worship team's job to be good and to practice and to hone their skills. And I completely agree that if a preacher doesn't have your attention, then they should sit down and stop talking. But if you are waiting for the perfect worship song set, if you are waiting for the perfect sermon, if you are waiting for the perfect list of ministry opportunities, you have elevated someone or something to a position it should never be. It is their job, the worship team's job, the church's job to help you, but it is your responsibility. It is your responsibility, not theirs. So do not elevate a person or thing to that middle ground. We don't want middlemen. That's what Saul does, is he prophesies, he takes that job of, if you want to get close to God, you've got to get close to me. And it's a lie. It's a lie. If you want to get close to God, you've got to get close to me. That is not their role. We don't like middlemen, do we? We unfortunately had to go to a hospital in August. Those of you who work in the NHS will know that is a bad time to be in a hospital. Because as you may well know, August is the time everyone gets a new job. So all the people, that's the month of rotation. So every person, Sharon's nodding, every person you meet, not everyone, but pretty much all of them you meet in a hospital in August, it's their first week on the job. So we're there trying to chat to this doctor, and every time we ask a question, it's like, just one, I'll just go and ask the consultant for that, thanks. So come back a few minutes later. Ask him another, I'll just go and, when you're talking to a salesperson, I'll just go and ask the manager. And they come, stop giving me a middleman. I don't want someone who has to keep going back and come to give me an answer. Give me the consultant. I don't want another prophet who tells me what God is saying. I want to hear what God is saying. I don't want another middleman between me and the divine. I want to be there. We don't like middlemen in our jobs. We don't like them in our hospitals. We don't like them in our lives. So why do we tolerate them in our spiritual activities? The Israelites have elevated someone to a position they should never have been as the go-between between them and God. And they crown him. There's this wonderful bit of the story. I love this bit of the story. I remember reading it 6 years ago when I heard I was preaching on this chapter. I distinctly remember this line from it, and I dug out my notes, and This line, I remember reading it, struck me so well, because imagine the scene. They're about to make King Saul king. It's a big deal. Coronations, big deal. That's why they named the chicken after it. Important. They get... I went down much better than I was expecting. And there's the moment where they're about to make King Saul king, and everyone looks around and is like, where's he gone? And I'll read it to you again. Where's he gone? And God said, he's not here. He's hiding in the baggage. Imagine 1952 or 1953, whenever it was. Where's the Queen gone? Oh, she's just out the back with the bins, the skip. Can someone just go get her a sec? We've got to make her queen. Yeah. It's that kind of symbol. It's like, where is he? He's just hiding in the baggage. And I remember reading that line. I remember it hit me because I just thought, what kings am I following that take me to a place that's just full of baggage? What kings or queens or things am I elevating that just take me to a place that is heavy, that's full of rubbish, that I'm carrying stuff I don't want to carry? Where am I following these kings and queens and things in my life? What have I elevated to a position that I should never have elevated in the first place? And I found myself following them, and they've just taken me to a place of baggage and weight and rubbish. Because they always let us down, don't they? Always. The leaders that we elevate to a position they should never be, sometimes it's not their fault. We've just decided that they're the only way to get to God, and then they let us down. Or the books, or the churches, or the ministry, the things that we've elevated to that middle ground, and we've done it, quite frankly, because we can't be bothered to do it ourselves. So we would rather delegate. Oh, can't we make it their job? Can't we make it their job to be the go-between between me and God? That's why we have a king who acts like a prophet that we elevate to a God. Wherever the things that we chase, the people we chase, the men and women that we have made to look like gods, let me tell you, if you do that, you will find them hiding in the baggage. When push comes to shove, they will offer you nothing but weight. There's two ways to get rid of a bad king. The first one is to not have it in the first place, which is the easy one. Second way is to get a new king. Matthew 21. As they approached Jerusalem and came to the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me." Because there's a king that is coming, and he's looking for the donkeys. Matthew 1, verses 21. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save the people from their sins. There's a king, and he's looking for the donkeys, and he will save the people. Matthew 26, while Jesus was in Bethany in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of expensive perfume, and she poured it on his head, because there's a new king. And he's looking for the donkeys, and he will be anointed, and he will rule over the people. Because here, we don't have King Saul. Here we have King Jesus. This is God becoming king. And let me tell you, this King Jesus will make demands of you, but not to impoverish you, to enrich you. Yes, this is a king who makes demands of you, but not in order to enslave you, but to make you his sons and daughters and friends. This is a new king on the throne. And as Jesus comes into Jerusalem, it's a big deal. This is the coronation of our new king. The phrase King Jesus, I think, is maybe not overused, but I help to think of it with its power that it would have had when Jesus first did that journey into Jerusalem on those donkeys that they eventually ended up finding. In the red corner, we had Rome. Now, Rome knew what it was like to have a king, and they had a very clear set of ideas of what a king would look like, and it was Caesar. In fact, they would have language about King Caesar, about a powerful Caesar, and if you stepped out of line, you would be smitten. Some of us still have views of God like that. Anyway, they would have phrases about it. Julius Caesar had declared himself Lord. His son had declared himself God. And Rome talked about an age of peace and joy and prosperity brought on by the Prince of Peace, this high priest and son of God, Octavius, or Augustus Caesar. And the Romans had a similar attitude. If you want to get close to God, you better get close to Caesar. And if you stand out of line, you get smitten. So say, maybe you resonate a little bit like that with the view of God. In the blue corner, there was the Jewish movement. Now, the Jewish people had been under a rough time. They'd had the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, and now the Romans. They had like an 80% tax rate. They couldn't afford to eat. It was all a bit of a mess. And all these people wanted was a God who for once would be on their side. Some of you might feel like that too. They just want for once, they could do with a nice tall fella, a handsome one who was good at fighting. And if we could just have a tall, handsome fella who was good at fighting, who could ride in on a big white horse and kill all of our enemies, then that would be good. Thank you very much, God. One of those would be great. Because we've got the Romans who have already got a King Caesar, and we've got the Jewish people who really just want another King Saul. Jesus doesn't really fit into either of those categories. This idea of God being on my side, we see it every World Cup, actually, which I really enjoy. I don't know if you've witnessed it. It normally happens when there's a country like, I don't know, Uganda, which has got a deep Protestant tradition over there. And over here, we've got a country like, I don't know, Brazil, which has got a deep Catholic history. And it goes to penalties. And you know what people in both of those countries are doing. And you're watching the game thinking, there's a lot on the line here. Pope's getting nervous. This isn't about football now. This is about Christianity itself. Because whoever wins, that's the side. I know it's a bit of a ridiculous example, but we still see it now, where two people, sometimes, not so much here, but sometimes you see two political parties that are polar opposite, except they're both convinced that God is on their side. And what they want to do is take their agenda and just tag Jesus on the end. Little bit like that Jewish mentality. What we want is to overthrow the Romans, nice, big, tall, handsome fellow who can ride in on a white horse and clear out the Romans. Oh, and by the way, that would be, God, if you could just join in on our agenda, that would be great. But there's a third strand, which is a strand of the prophets. This is a great quote from Abraham Lincoln. I do not want God on my side. My greatest concern is that I am on his. Because there is a feeling that when God moves, he does it on his own agenda, not somebody else's. There's a whisper that maybe there is a kingdom is coming, a kingdom that is already here, that doesn't look like what I want, but I get the choice to buy into what he wants. Because when God becomes king, he won't look like Caesar. He won't look like Saul. This is a king that will change everything. And if you imagine those two big political powers of Rome on the one hand and the Jewish leaders on the other, and then you imagine a short rabbi riding in on a donkey in one side of the city while the Romans would ride in on the other on a big horse. And he's coming into the center of economics. And he's coming to the center of political power. This is a social statement, a theological statement. This is a king who doesn't want to be relegated to Sundays. This is a king who wants it all. Because we've got a King Jesus who is riding into the city, and he will not settle for second place. This is a king whose name is Jesus, not Saul. We have a king who rides in, not on a white horse, but on a donkey, who doesn't lead an army of people who look like him. He leads a ragtag group of prostitutes and tax collectors and lepers and people who've been healed and redeemed and restored. And as he rides into the city, this is a king who will not be found in the baggage. This is a king who is dealing with it. Because I don't want a king who I've elevated to a position between myself and God who is going to lead me to a heavy place of disappointment. I want a king who's going to deal with it. I do not want a man who looks like a god. I want a God who looks like a man. And in this political tinderbox, Jesus comes in, not on a war horse, on a donkey. A king who doesn't seek to serve, to be served, but to serve. A king who does not act as my intermediate between God and myself. A king who is God. And they crown him with thorns. They give him a purple tunic, and he is enthroned on the cross. And he says, it is finished. Because God has become king. He's not hiding in the baggage. He has dealt with it. And the challenge to the centurion 2,000 years ago is the same as the challenge to the people who were around Saul when he got coronated. Who gets to be king? Who gets to be king? Because this one doesn't settle for second place. Let's pray. Father, for those of us who have a tendency to look around and get jealous, for those of us who elevate stuff that's making demands of our life, won't you give us a contentedness and a peace and a courage to live within our means? Won't you keep our eyes focused on what is important? Help us to keep the main thing, and not to get our heads turned by what the Assyrians are doing. God, we're sorry for the times that we have elevated things or people to positions they should never have been in the first place. We're sorry for times we've got lazy and delegated that bit of our lives to someone else. We're sorry for the times that we didn't come to you directly. And God, we thank you, you're a good king. And this morning, we choose to say, we follow King Jesus. Amen.